One of the most common questions people tend to ask each other is, what would you do with $1 million? Well, I'm going to tweak that a little bit. Here's my question to you. If money were no object, what was the one thing that you would want? Go ahead and answer in the comments, and I'll go ahead and answer for myself. For those of you who do not know, I love photography, taking pictures. I'd like to be able to get up some free time and some money to do it more often. Um, at the moment, it's basically limited to family trips or hanging out with friends. But I'd like to do more traveling and be able to take more pictures. Um, but if I didn't have any sort of financial constraints of any kind, I would be asking for a major upgrade for my Nikon D70, and that would be what you see in front of you, the Nikon D4. Now, why on earth would I ask or get this monster? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, this thing's built like a tank. No matter what you throw at it, it'll survive. That's number one. That's reason number one. Reason number two, this little area down here. 3 words: vertical battery grip. Now, on most DSLRs that are enthusiast level or above, like the Nikon D70-100, which would be the natural successor to the D70 that I have, the battery grip is an additional accessory. But with this camera, it is built in. You also get a full frame sensor. Now, I know there's a lot of debate out there as to who needs full frame. The word is that if you're not going to print anything beyond 8.5 by 11, for example, that a studio quality print or a studio quality print that a DX format sensor would be fine. Although there are advantages. The FX sensor, for example, does better in low light, and it also does better with handling noise levels. So that's another advantage. Turning around to there's one more thing. You'll notice that there is no command dial for those of you that might be used to that sort of thing. Now then, let's go to the back. Direct access to everything. You'll also notice, I'll give you an example here, we have an autofocus on button. We also have an autofocus on button here, and you'll notice that the label is sideways. Well, again, we talked about this grip here. The advantage of that is that if you're holding the camera in portrait mode, in fact, if we go back to the front, and we take a look here, you can see that there's a sub-command dial here, and there's a sub-command dial here. There's a shutter button here. You can't see it, but there's a shutter button also over here. And a lock switch to turn it on and off, where the main power switch would be up here. And this, again, is to help you if you're shooting in portrait mode. It is just much, much easier. Now, the D70-100 or the D7000 or the D90, you can get this as an accessory, but again, this is built in. It's just better to have everything in one package. And again, you have many more direct access controls which I really, really like. This camera can also do video. The D70 cannot do that, unfortunately. So that's also a major upgrade for me. And again, keep in mind, I'm answering the question, if you had an unlimited bank account, basically, what would you do? What would you get? So you've got many more direct access controls here on the back. Here in the memory compartment, you've got 2 memory card types. One is compact flash, which I already use on the D70, so that'll be a natural transfer. The other is a brand new format. I've not seen the cards in any stores, but then again, I haven't been looking. Maybe they are in the stores. But I haven't seen one in person, and that is what they call an Xqd format. And the Xqd card is brand new. It's sort of I'm going to say it's somewhere between a compact flash card and an SD card in size and durability. But as I understand it, these things are lightning fast. The D4 is the only camera on the market to take advantage of these ports, of these cards. You'll notice, by the way, that there is no flash. I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't like shooting with any on-camera flashes, because what happens is the camera's flash will shoot straight into your face. You may have noticed red eye effect, for example. Well, to minimize that, you would need to attach an external flash unit to the top here, to the hot shoe. You move the flash back, and it would bounce off the ceiling and onto your subject. And that is just a much better way to do things. Although, personally, I try to get away without using the flash at all. Again, because of the issues that I mentioned. I personally don't have any external flashes. You know what? That's actually a good idea. I might add that to my list of unlimited bank account. Hypothetically speaking. Let's take a look at the top. You'll notice that there is no mode dial. This particular bottom dial with the S, the CL, the CH, that is your drive mode. How many shots do you want to take? Do you want to take one shot? Do you want to take a low burst speed of about 3 or 4 frames a second? Or do you want to kick it into high gear? And this particular camera can go all the way up to 10 frames a second. That's great because let's say, for example, that I see something and it just whizzes right by me. Unfortunately, because of my lack of 3D vision, I do have some tracking issues. But if I can get my eyes on it, being able to throw this into high gear 10 frames a second, there's definitely a chance of getting something. But the 10 frames a second is primarily aimed at those that shoot sports or photojournalism. Metering, your bracketing, your flash settings, again, if you had an external flash attached, no automatic settings at all. So, what about your shooting modes? Well, on this particular display here, you see a P. That is for program. That is the closest thing to automatic that this camera offers. You change the shooting mode between program, shutter, aperture, and full manual by holding down this mode button and using the rear dial here to adjust your shooting mode. Here's your exposure compensation button, your video record, which again the D70 does not have. But the fact that this camera does not have any automatic controls, I personally like because I never shoot in full auto. The closest thing I come to is program, because full auto locks everything out. At least in full program, you have the ability, in programmed automatic, you have the ability to adjust things like your ISO and your white balance. Actually, in automatic, you do have the opportunity to adjust your white balance, but ISO's locked out. And the trouble is, if you lock everything out, the camera pretty much does everything, and in some instances, it may not do everything right. So being able to go into program and adjust, at the very least, your ISO, keep your ISO down as low as it'll go, minimizes the amount of noise. So that's why I like shooting in these manual exposure modes. Much more room to breathe. Also, the battery life. The battery life on the D4 is insane. And again, this is primarily targeted at photojournalists, sports photographers, that sort of thing. Or anybody who really wants something and, again, can afford it. And looking back at the hypothetical situation, if I had the money, I'd certainly get this. But one of the other reasons I would get it is because the batteries span this entire area here in the bottom. What does that mean? Well, that means you can have up to 2,000, I think it's around 2,000 shots on a single charge, which is insane for battery life. So personally, if I were to get, I feel like if I were to get the D4, I would be set for life. As far as lenses, I would definitely upgrade to a full frame lens, probably a 24 to 85 general purpose zoom, and then something with a nice wide aperture because I love taking pictures of flowers, things with a macro photography focus. And the main reason is because things like flowers and trees and whatnot, they're static subjects, and I have a much easier time composing my shot with a static subject. And again, it's because of my vision. It's just easier for me to work with. But I also love the bokeh, the background blur in these portrait shots. And the best way to do that is to have a nice wide aperture lens. I can't tell which lens this is, but it's definitely a prime. And the prime lens basically means a fixed focal length, and that's actually an advantage. A lot of people, a general purpose zoom is good for everyday use, but if you want to get creative, get at least one prime. And the reason is because you're forced to walk around and think more about your exposure. But no, if I had the unlimited funds, I would definitely get a D4 for myself. But I wouldn't just keep the funds all to myself. One of my relatives has this. It is a Canon Digital Elf. This used to carry the model designation PowerShot S100, which has since been replaced by a more enthusiast model. This particular camera is well over 10 years old. You can see here the resolution is only 2.1 megapixels, and nowadays 2.1 megapixels is even lower than cell phones. But they've had this camera for many, many years, and when I showed them the various images that my D70 could produce, they were blown away. And I was thinking to myself, if I personally were to get them a replacement camera for this, what would I get them? And what I would get them is the Nikon D3100, the D3100. And the reason is because it is a very cheap digital SLR. It is the cheapest in Nikon's lineup. But you can see it's much less complicated. We take a look at the control layout here. It is much less complicated than the D4 that I showed you. But again, the D4 is not meant for beginners. It is no way in heck meant for beginners. The body alone costs $5,000. Or $6,000, I'm sorry. But no, for my relative, I would definitely get the D3100. And the reason is because of this. If you can see where my magnifying glass is, where I'm moving back and forth, basically underlining. This camera has a guide mode. And what is the guide mode? The guide mode can be thought of as a 1, 2, 3, ABC, hold my hand kind of approach to being more creative with your photos. This is meant for somebody who is coming from a point and shoot and has been so used to automatic, but they've seen the images of a digital SLR. They'd like to know how they can produce those images. They've seen the photos in the magazines of the flowers that stand out in the field, and they want to know how they can create that. This camera is very friendly. It is very step-by-step. It gives you a it looks like a training manual from a piece of computer software, and that's basically how it operates. You've got shooting, you've got your playback, and you've got your setup. But this camera can also record videos, which is nice because their particular camera, much like my D70, does stills only. Excuse me. And this can actually do, because of the bigger sensor in this camera compared to the sensor that is in this one, that the D3100 would definitely outperform this, hands down. Plus, it would give them, like in movies and stills. Plus, it would give them, like I said, a very easy hold your hand kind of approach to creating these images that that I'm used to producing with things like my program and shutter aperture, my exposure compensation, ISO, white balance adjustment, that sort of thing. For somebody who's never touched that stuff before, I'd say the Nikon D3100 is an excellent choice. But if I had unlimited funds, that's what I would do. Is I would get a D4 for myself, a D3100 for my relative, and then I'd take the rest of it and throw it into charities. But if you guys had that kind of cash, what would you do with it? Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.